Good morning, everybody. We are live here from the birdhouse, and today we're talking about attracting Orioles and hummingbirds to your yard. We are definitely in spring migration time, which is really exciting. So, we were talking Saturday about some of the migrants you can look for coming through in your backyard or as you're out hiking, and they are definitely flowing in. Saturday, I had a yellow-rumped warbler in the backyard. Yesterday, I had brown creepers climbing all the way up my trees, which was really cool. And then this morning, I woke up to a yellow-bellied sapsucker in my tree in the backyard too. So the birds are definitely flowing in. We are getting those migrants coming in, and every day there should be more and more. That being said, Saturday on our next broadcast, we'll talk about some more migrants that are coming in and give you an update there. And we'll let you know as soon as people are starting to see those Orioles and hummingbirds. So we're recommending that you have your feeder out probably by this weekend or, Monday. We're saying the 28th or so at the latest, because they usually start showing up very, very, very late April. We'll usually get some reports, and then early May, they really start to flow in. So you want to get your feeders out early, which we'll talk about in this presentation. But as always, if you have any questions, you can put those in the comment box. Definitely let us know what kind of things you're seeing, especially with migration season starting and being in full swing. And you can always just say hi in the comments as well. So we will get started here. We'll start with the Orioles portion of the presentation. And here on the East Coast where I am, we have two different species of Orioles. We have the Baltimore Oriole, which is going to be the most common that you'll get in your backyard. If you're out west, there are different species out there, but a lot of these tips are going to be the same as far as attracting them to your backyard. So you can still use these same tips to attract them. The Baltimore Oriole male is bright orange. That's him on the left here in this picture. And then the female isn't quite as bright, but she's still the same size. She's larger than a goldfinch. She's that yellowy, kind of yellowy orangish color. So usually the males will show up first in people's yards and at people's feeders, and then the females are just shortly behind. And this is the Baltimore Oriole map here. The orange is where they'll spend the spring and summer. This is their breeding territory. And then they'll migrate. They'll migrate through from Mexico and Central America and South America. So that's where they spend the winter, in that blue portion right there. So that's where they migrate to in the fall. They spend all winter there. And then in the yellow are the spots where they just pass through. And then the orange color there are where they will spend the summer until they migrate back down south again. So we've got the Baltimore Oriole, and then we also have what's called an orchard Oriole. And the male orchard Orioles are darker in color. So that's the male on the right. So you can see it's kind of got the same coloring as your Baltimore Oriole, but just much, much darker. It's more of a chestnut, a deep chestnut reddish kind of color. And then the female is very yellowish in color. And again, going to be larger than a goldfinch. So if you see a kind of fairly large yellow bird in your backyard, it's probably going to be one of these two Oriole species, especially if it's coming to one of your Oriole feeders. And the orchard Oriole has kind of a similar map to the Baltimore Oriole. It doesn't go up as far north, but it does spend the winters in Mexico and Central America, and migrates up into our area, or at least where I am, for the spring and summer months. You're more likely to see Baltimore Oriole, but orchard Orioles are around. And then this is a juvenile orchard Oriole here, which looks a lot different than the other Orioles. It's a different kind of plumage there. So Orioles in general are found high in leafy deciduous trees, but usually not deep into forests. They like open woodland and forest edges, which is a really common type of habitat around here, so they can be quite common. They'll forage for insects and fruits in brush and in shrubs. They often drink nectar from blooms, especially as they're migrating in, and a lot of these trees are going to be in bloom. And they are common in backyards, and they've been more common in backyards than the hummingbirds have been as of late. So they have been a fairly easy bird to attract. So if you've never tried, I would highly suggest you try because you probably have some pretty good success, especially if you are by any kind of this edge habitat or if you've got any kind of trees in the backyard. Even if they're scattered, you've got a good chance of getting the Baltimore Orioles. In the spring and fall, the nectar and ripe fruits compose more of their diet, but in the summer, while breeding and feeding their young, much of their diet will consist of insects. And this is pretty common with most migratory birds that will come here for the spring and summer that aren't here in the winter. They have lots of insects in their diet. As far as nesting goes, this is what an Oriole nest looks like. And right now, before all the leaves come out on the trees, you might see stuff like this hanging off some branches. When there's not leaves on the trees, you can see them quite a bit better. This is what their nest looks like. They do weave a nest that hangs from the branch of a tree. So the female will choose a nest site within her territory, defended by her mate. She anchors the nest firmly to a fork in the slender upper branches of the tree, so they are pretty high up. The distinctive nest usually hangs below a branch, but is sometimes anchored along a vertical tree trunk. The female weaves the nest usually 3 to 4 inches deep, with a small opening 2 to 3 inches wide on top, and the bulging bottom chamber, which is usually 3 to 4 inches across, where her eggs will rest. And this only takes about a week. And if you have ever seen the Baltimore Orioles nest, they do look just like this. They're really, really neat. And actually, the last 2 years when we've been doing our spring bird walk at Whitehaven Park, for the past 2 years, we've both years come across an Oriole building its nest, which is really, really cool. And that walk will be in just about, I believe, 3 weeks in May. We'll be doing that walk. So if you are local, consider showing up for that walk. It's been really fun. One of our customers a few years ago was able to take a series of photos of this nest building process, which is really, really cool. Chris sent in these photos of an Oriole building a nest in a tree nearby her house. And so she was able to take a picture every day throughout the nest building process. So this was from day one. You can see there's some little nesting material up in the tree. They've just started the nest building process. Day 2, there's a little bit more. Day 3, there's been quite a bit of progress, and you can see the little Oriole's head sticking out of the nest, which is really cute. You can see it right here. There's their little head. Day 4, it's really coming together. And then here is day 5. So really cool series of photos there where the Oriole has gone from start to finish with the nest building process. And so, yeah, it doesn't take very long at all. So after 6 days, it looks like it was pretty much intact. As far as what happens inside the nest, the clutch size is anywhere between 3 and 7 eggs. And just like other birds, the Orioles, the more mature they are, the older they are, they tend to lay more eggs. They only have 1 brood per year, and they'll sit on those eggs for anywhere between 11 and 14 days. That's the incubation time. Once those eggs have hatched, it's the nestling period, and that's when those little birds are in the nest begging for food, and that only lasts for about another 11 to 14 days. So once those eggs hatch, it's only about 2 weeks until those little birds are out into the world. And that series of photos that we've seen of the nests were Baltimore Oriole nests, and this is what the orchard Oriole nest looks like too. So they look really, really similar to one another. And then once those young are out in the world, don't be surprised if they start coming to your bird feeders, especially if you've got things like mealworms out there. It's not uncommon to see the juveniles come to the feeders with the parents, and the parents are showing them where the food sources are. So this is another picture that Chris sent in of a juvenile Oriole there with its parent. So really cool. As far as feeders, the feeders are the best way you can attract Baltimore Orioles. They don't nest in houses. They will do their own thing and nest in trees. They don't come to bird baths all too often, but you can always put out water, of course. But feeders are really the way to go if you want to attract Baltimore Orioles. And they'll eat a diversity of things. So they'll eat suet, they'll eat oranges, nectar, Jelly is their absolute favorite. And then as you go on in the season, you want to add mealworms to that too to try to keep them coming. So once those eggs have hatched and those young are in the nest, they are feeding them a lot of insect material. So they feed them a lot of mealworms. So if you're only going to put out one thing, though, I would put out the jelly. It seems like early in the season, they are super hungry. They're migrating in, they've been flying all night. And so they'll sometimes come to suet earlier in the season, which has a lot of fat in it, which is great. And then they'll also go to oranges and drink nectar. But it seems like as the season goes on, they will consistently and reliably eat jelly, where they kind of fizzle on some of the other things. Like they tend to fizzle on the nectar, it seems like, as the season goes on. It's not the case necessarily for everybody, but that's what most people find. And so there are different feeders out there to attract them. As far as suet goes, you can get what are some orange flavored suet. And that is what I would recommend if you're trying to get Orioles, to switch up your suet to the orange suet as they're migrating in. So next time you're getting some suet, I would switch it out with some orange suet. I've had them come to my suet feeder a few times and early on in the spring as they're migrating in. And then there are oranges. Super simple way to attract them. You just take an orange, cut it in half. Clementines are fine. We get that question all the time. Any kind of orangey, citrusy food. And it doesn't need to be put on anything really fancy. That's another great thing about Oriole feeders. They don't have to be very fancy at all. A lot of Oriole feeders will have some kind of a spike on them that you can easily just spike the orange onto. This one here on the left is just a few spikes and it's just covered in oranges. But most Oriole feeders will have some way for you to stick an orange on the side of it or on the base of it for them. There's also nectar. So you can get pre-made nectar. You can get mixes that you just add water to, or you can make your own Oriole nectar using sugar and water. And the recipe is going to be not as sweet as the hummingbird nectar. Hummingbird nectar is 1 part sugar to 4 parts water. And you can use that for Orioles. They won't they won't poo-poo it, they won't ignore it, but you can also dilute it a little bit. It doesn't need to be as sweet for the Orioles. You can do 1 part sugar to 5 parts water if you'd like for the Oriole nectar. Or what a lot of people also do is just make up a big pitcher of hummingbird nectar using the 1-to-4 ratio, and then they just put that in their Oriole feeders as well. So we hear stories all the time of Orioles coming to hummingbird feeders, hummingbirds coming to Oriole feeders. So that's pretty typical too. But the number one thing I would absolutely put out is jelly. And they do love this birdberry jelly that we have. It's a mix of grape and blackberry, and they just absolutely love it. There's no artificial sweeteners. There's no artificial dyes, nothing like that in it. And they just love it. Grape jelly is the Orioles' favorite. So definitely make sure that you're giving them grape jelly. I've heard of them eating things like orange marmalade and stuff too. But it seems like the grape is absolutely what they prefer. And if you are buying it in a grocery store or something, just make sure that there's no artificial flavorings or dyes or corn syrup or anything like that. And then as the season goes on, so usually this is going to be in mid-June or so, once their eggs have hatched, consider adding mealworms to the mix too. So mealworms are a really great thing for them to feed their babies. They are naturally going to be going out and looking for caterpillars for their young. And if they can find these soft-bodied insects like mealworms, they will just grab beakfuls and bring them to their babies. As far as feeders go, there are so many different types of Oriole feeders, and they're all going to be some combination of feeding them either the nectar or the jelly or the oranges. Some provide for all three, and these two provide here for all three of those things. This is called the Ultimate Oriole Feeder on the left-hand side, and then there's the Oriole Fest Feeder, which has historically been our best-selling Oriole feeder. And both of these allow for nectar inside this dish here. It's got nice big perches on it for the Orioles. That's going to be one thing that separates the Oriole feeders from the Hummingbird feeders, is that the Oriole feeders have these nice big perches on them because they do need a perch to land on. In general, sometimes they can land on these little sticks or they can cling on to different things, but having a nice big perch is really great for them. And then also the size of the feeding ports is going to be larger than that of hummingbird feeders because Orioles have a larger beak. So they can't always fit their beak inside those small feeding ports of hummingbird feeders. So this is one type of feeder here that allows for nectar inside. There's little dishes on the top where you can put jelly in, and then they both also have little spots where you can put oranges. So those are both super, super popular. This one, like I said, it's called the Ultimate Oriole Feeder, and then there's the Oriole Fest Feeder. We have both of these in stock. Then there's also some that have little roofs on the top of them, which is really nice. That creates a little barrier from rain. We also have weather guards. I'll show you some accessories at the end that you can add to your feeders to help protect them, especially with the jelly. So in the when you start to put out the jelly, if we get any kind of rain, you'll notice that the rain will dilute the jelly and the Orioles will still eat it. But if you want to help keep the rain out of your feeder, I would highly suggest putting a weather guard on it or getting a feeder that has a little roof on it like these so you don't have to worry about the jelly, especially getting wet. We have this feeder here on the right, which is super popular. It has 2 cups in it for jelly and it has 2 spikes on it for oranges. It holds a whole bunch of jelly and oranges. It's recycled. It's made out of recycled material, so it's super easy to clean, and it does have that roof. So we have quite a few different types of Oriole feeders to choose from in stock right now. And you can always shop online. We've got some of them online, and we have even more here in the store. And when you put out Oriole feeders, you might find that you get more than just Orioles. I always get these guys coming to my yard in the early spring. These are gray catbirds. They will also eat the jelly and the oranges, so don't be surprised if you see them coming to your Oriole feeder. They're a mimic. They're in that same family as this bird, the mockingbird, and so you might hear them calling and calling and calling from your backyard also when they're there to feed at the feeder. And mockingbirds are also known to come to Oriole feeders. They'll also eat the fruit and the jelly, especially of those on those feeders. So don't be surprised if you see other things besides the Orioles. And every once in a while we hear of something like a cardinal eating the jelly, or I've had house finches eating the jelly. So you might get other things eating the jelly as well. Moving on to hummingbirds. So attracting hummingbirds can be fairly easy because you just need to put out one type of thing, and we'll get to that. But here on the East Coast, we have only one species of hummingbird, and that's the ruby-throated hummingbird. If you're out west, you have way more species than that. And so out west, you'll see those big groups of hummingbirds that all kind of congregate at feeders, and you can have 10, 20 hummingbirds at your feeders at a time, especially if you're on their migratory route. Well, that doesn't really happen on the East Coast because we only have the one species, and they are quite territorial, and you can see what their range is like. This is their range map. They spend their winters in Mexico and Central America. They'll migrate up into this area for the summer, and that is where they will mate and raise their young. But there's also, besides the ruby-throated hummingbird, there is what's called the rufous hummingbird, which is a western species, but it is expanding its territory. So just like some birds, cardinals are good examples that used to historically be a southern bird. They've been slowly expanding their range. Red-bellied woodpeckers, Carolina wrens, those are really good examples of birds that are expanding their range over time. Same with the rufous hummingbird, and pulled up these maps from eBird, and these are sightings of rufous hummingbird historically throughout the years. So you can see that they have been spotted all across the US, and this is more of in the past year where they've been spotted, but still some scattered reports on the East Coast. So You never know, just like with anything else. If you see a hummingbird that looks strikingly different than the ruby-throated hummingbird, take a closer look because rufous hummingbird are expanding their range in the US. So kind of a fun little fact there. But they'll come to the same types of feeders as the ruby-throated hummingbird. So hummingbirds are found in old fields, forest edges, meadows, orchard, stream borders, and in backyards. On their tropical wintering grounds, ruby-throated hummingbirds live in dry forests, citrus groves, hedgerows, and in scrub. But when they come up to their breeding range, they have kind of a more diverse habitat. They feed on the nectar of red or orange tubular flowers, and that's another really, really great way to attract hummingbirds is to plant flowers that the hummingbirds like. So it seems like early in the spring when they're migrating in and there's not a ton of flowers in bloom, they'll come to feeders quite often. And then as the season goes on, in the summer, sometimes they'll drop off from feeders, and it's probably because they're going to natural flowers that they would naturally drink from. And then in the fall, when they're migrating back down south, and again, super, super hungry, all of a sudden people are seeing them at feeders again in large, large numbers. So if you want to attract them throughout the whole season, I would highly recommend that you do put in some plants, if you can, in your garden that will attract them. Things like trumpet creeper, cardinal flower, honeysuckle, wildflowers like jewelweed, bee balm, morning glory. So lots of things that are bright, bright red or orange and tubular. Those are great for hummingbirds. They're also known to eat small insects and they can catch them mid-air. They're known to eat really, really small insects like fruit flies, but then they'll also pull insects out of spider webs. They'll eat spiders. They'll use the spider web to build their nest and kind of keep it all intact. So they will eat insects as well as drink the nectar. As far as their nesting goes, females will build their nests on a slender, often descending small tree branch. The nest is really, really small. So the odds of discovering a hummingbird nest are pretty slim because their nest is only about the size of a thimble and it is directly on top of a branch. The nest is made of thistle or dandelion down and is held together with strands of spider silk. And then they'll usually take little lichen and put that on the outside of the nest that helps kind of, that will help kind of keep it camouflaged. And so here's a good example of that. You can see some of this lichen here on the outside of the hummingbird nest. And hummingbirds will have a clutch of 1 to 3 eggs. Usually it's 2 eggs. They have 1 to 2 broods a year. The size of the eggs are very, very small. They're only about ½ an inch long. So they're about the size of a Tic Tac. The incubation is anywhere between 12 and 14 days. So that a hummingbird mother will sit on the eggs for about 2 weeks. And then those eggs hatch and then they'll be inside that nest for anywhere between 18 and 22 days. So for about 3 weeks, they'll be in the nest growing until they're out in the world. I added this because we've been getting so many questions about hummingbird houses and hummingbirds nesting in houses. The thing is, hummingbirds aren't cavity nesters, so they don't nest in houses. There's a lot of ads out there promoting hummingbird houses, and they're all beautifully photoshopped. They're showing things like these roosting pockets that we sell in the winter time that the birds will go in to stay out of the elements, but they don't nest in houses. These are very cute and small little roosting spots, but these are not houses for hummingbirds. They will just build their own nest on a tree. So unfortunately, there are no such things as hummingbird houses, but there are nesting perches, and we've sold these for a few years. Haven't had a lot of feedback on them because we haven't sold all that many. We tend to sell more nesting material than anything else as far as attracting hummingbirds goes. But the idea with these are they're supposed to mimic kind of a little branch scenario, and the hummingbirds can build their nest in between these little spokes here. So there are such things as hummingbird nesting perches, but not hummingbird houses. So your best bet is to just put out some nesting material if you are trying to attract hummingbirds and try to, entice them to nest in your yard. And we do have nesting material called Hummer Helper that is designed specifically for hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are very territorial, so you're not likely to see a whole bunch of hummingbirds all at one feeder all at once, at least here on the East Coast. There are things called hummingbird swings, which do work. The idea with these are that you hang them above your feeders, or you hang them somewhere by your feeders where the hummingbirds can still see that nectar source. They'll sit on these little swings, and then if something else comes into their territory and tries to go to the feeder, they'll go after that bird, usually another hummingbird. So the idea is, if you want to get multiple hummingbirds and you want to attract a lot of hummingbirds in your yard, the best thing that you can do is get multiple feeders. They don't need to be really big. They don't need to hold a lot of nectar. You can get multiple small little hummingbird feeders and put them in different spots in your yard where they can't necessarily see one another. That's going to be your best bet because they are so territorial. They do scare other birds away. And in fact, they are so territorial, you might not want to put your hummingbird feeders on the same pole as your seed feeders because they are known to scare away birds from seed feeders too. So the other thing that we would recommend is keep your hummingbird feeders separate from your other feeders. And that can go with Orioles too. Orioles can be kind of skittish. They get along better with other birds, if you will, but they can sometimes be scared away by other larger birds. So I always keep my hummingbird and my Oriole feeders separate from my other feeders. Just like the Oriole nectar, there is hummingbird nectar that you can buy that's ready to use that you just pour right into the feeder. That's what I've been using recently. Or you can also get hummingbird nectar concentrate that you just add water to. These are really popular. This is by the Sweet Seed Company. Not only does it have all the nutrients that the hummingbirds need, but it also has calcium and electrolytes in there. And they're infused with wildflower extract. So there's something about this nectar that they just really, really like. I've had really good luck with this. This is the sweet nectar or the Sweet Seed nectar that's been really, really good for hummingbirds. They make it for Orioles too, and they even make butterfly nectar too. There's different types of hummingbird feeders, just like there are Oriole feeders. And we always recommend that you get one that's easy to clean. You do want to make sure to clean them out pretty often. Rinse them out every time you refill them. The nectar should be changed every couple of days to every few days, especially if they're out in the sun, because if they are left out too long, they can get mold inside them, which is not good for the hummingbirds. So you want to get something that is really easy to clean. So these are some styles that are super easy to clean. We've got it's called the Dr. JB feeder, which has been very popular. I like these dish styles. They're super easy to fill and clean. There is a way to keep the nectar fresh longer, which I'll show you in just a second too. Feeder accessories. I was talking a bit about weather guards, especially with the Oriole feeders. These are really popular so the jelly doesn't get washed away. We have them in different colors. People like the orange ones usually for their Oriole feeders. We also have some bright red ones for hummingbird feeders. And hummingbirds are attracted to the color red. So if you are trying to get hummingbirds to your backyard, I would suggest getting a bright red weather guard for it, just because that's more color to bring the bird in, especially if you've never had hummingbirds before. I will put out as much red as possible to try to attract them. So we do have these weather guards. Now this is a must-have accessory. I would say this is what's called an ant moat. And the idea with these are that they're just little cups. You fill them with water and then you hang your feeder from them. And ants can't get around this water here, or this moat. They can't get around it to get down to the feeder. This is such a great accessory. Highly recommend this. Some feeders have built-in ant moats of various sizes. Those are usually pretty good, but they can kind of sometimes be pretty small too, and they might evaporate too soon to actually be super helpful depending on the season, especially as it gets into the summer and it gets warmer and hotter. So I would highly recommend getting a ant moat, especially if you've got ants coming to the feeders, which you probably will if you keep them out for months at a time. And then we also have what's called Hummingbird Feeder Fresh or Nectar Defender. This is a really, really great product too. So I mentioned you should change the nectar out in your feeder every, 2 or 4 days, especially if it's in the sun, it's going to be quicker to go bad. So if it's in the shade, you can usually get away with changing it out every few days. But if it's in the bright sun, you want to change it out every couple of days. But you can always add this product to your nectar. It's called Feeder Fresh. And you might be familiar with the Feeder Fresh product that we sell that goes in the seed feeders, especially like Niger feeders, to keep that seed from going moldy. This is another product that does just that. So it's all natural micronutrients. It's completely safe for the birds. It's been tested and reviewed, and it is all good for the birds. And what you do is you just put a little bit of this, it's a liquid, you put a little bit of it in your nectar and it'll keep it fresh for more like a week or 10 days. So you don't have to clean it out as often. You don't have to clean your feeders out as often or change the nectar out as often. So this is a really popular product because of that, especially if you're going away for a few days at a time, or if you just don't have the time to clean and change your nectar out as often as you'd like. This product is awesome. There's also other things you can do to keep ants away. This is an ant repellent. It almost smells like cinnamon and clove, and it's in a little tube. And what you do is you just put a little ring around the pole or even around the top of the feeder, somewhere where you want a barrier so the ants don't cross, and they will not cross the barrier of this gel. This is made by the same company that makes this Feeder Fresh Nectar Defender, so you know it's all totally safe, all natural, and it's great. It won't harm the birds at all, and it's just a natural way to keep insects away. So this works really well as well. Also, there's bee guards. Depending on what kind of feeder you have, it might be able to have bee guards attached to it. The Oriole Fest feeder that we carry allows for bee guards. They're just little rubber tips that go on the inside of the feeder. The idea there is that these rubber tips are on the inside of the feeder where the bird's beak will puncture in to get the nectar. The birds can puncture through this little tip, this little rubber tip with their beaks, but bees and wasps can't because they just have little tongues. They just can't puncture through it. So there are bee guards for different feeders that help keep the bees out. It's not really too much you can do to keep the bees out of the jelly or the oranges, except put out those fake bald-faced hornets nests. Those work pretty well because bees and wasps can be quite territorial, especially the bald-faced hornets. If they see one of these fake hornets nests, they think, uh-oh, there's already somebody established there, and they tend to go elsewhere. That's another thing you can do, but there are certain feeders that allow for bee guards to put on them. So in general, just to kind of wrap up, you want to get your Oriole feeders out early before you see any Orioles. That is a really good way to attract them. If you put your feeders out too late, you might miss the boat. So if you want to, you can put them out as early as this week. I will put them out no later than, say, Monday of next week. This weekend would be a great time, and we'll absolutely let you know as soon as we hear any reports of Orioles coming through. They're still a little bit further down south, but they're making their way up. You want to make sure to stock up on jelly. Every year when the Orioles come in, I notice the shelves of Wegmans in the jelly section are completely empty, which is pretty funny. So you want to make sure to stock up on jelly so you have enough. We certainly have a ton of the birdberry jelly, so we have plenty of that here. So you don't have to worry about that. We'll always have that here for you. But stock up on jelly, because when they start coming in and they're hungry, they can go through quite a bit of jelly. I would definitely add a weather guard, especially to the Oriole feeders. Come nestling time, once those young are out in the world, I will put some mealworms out, either switch to mealworms or add it to your offering of food, especially for the Orioles. Make sure to keep the hummingbird nectar fresh, and multiple feeders for hummingbirds will work best for attracting them. So please let us know once you do start to see Orioles and hummingbirds. Send in your pictures, give us a call, let us know that they're in the area so we can share that with everybody else. It looks like there's some people on too that have some comments. Daniel's on, says good morning. Good morning, Daniel. Christina's on and says, how can I track the actual progress of the Oriole and hummingbird migration? There are some different maps out there. If you Google Baltimore Oriole migration tracker or hummingbird migration tracker, you'll find some different sites. I've always used eBird to kind of track where they are. If you go on eBird's site and you click explore, you can click on species maps and you can filter it for this year. So that's what I always do to kind of get the most, what I feel is the most accurate data for where they are. I've been looking at it to see, okay, where are Baltimore Orioles being spotted this year? And then it's a little deceiving because there are some scattered up north that have been overwintering. So there are sometimes those flukes, those outlier birds that do overwinter in places that they normally don't. So there's been some kind of scattered around that have been spotted since, say, January of this year. So I kind of keep those out of the equation because they're not migrating. But it allows you to see, okay, when have they been seen last, and in what numbers too, to kind of get an idea of what's migrating through. So I like to check eBird for that. Jen's on, says, good morning, everybody. Good morning, Jen. Lynn is on and saying, do you recommend having the Oriole feeders on a separate pole? I always do. Although actually I've done both. I always make sure I have at least one on a separate pole, I guess I should say. I do have multiple Oriole feeders, so I have one on my feeder pole with my suet feeder and my sunflower feeder, but then I also have them on another pole kind of further out in the backyard, further away from the other bird activity. And that tends to be where they go the most. So I think they do prefer having a separate feeding station, the Orioles. And I would definitely keep the hummingbirds away from the other birds too, because like I mentioned, they are very, very territorial. Steel Monkey is on saying, I love the idea of the hummingbird swing. That is adorable. It is pretty adorable, and they will use them. And Christine says, so not putting Oriole and hummingbird feeders on the same pole. That's a good question. I mean, you can. The only downside is that those hummingbirds might scare away the Orioles because they are so territorial. So if you have the option to, I would keep them on separate poles. Steel Monkey is saying, is it wise, Liz, to use bee guards with hummingbird feeders? Wouldn't that be dangerous for their beaks if they're startled? I don't think so, no, because the bee guards aren't they're not hard or anything like that. Like they wouldn't snap the beaks or anything like that of the bird. So no, I wouldn't say that they're dangerous at all for the birds. Good question though. We always want to make sure that we are doing what's best for them. So I appreciate that question. It looks like that's everybody's comments and questions for now. Like I mentioned, we'll be back on Saturday with another broadcast. And I'm sure there's going to be other things that have migrated through. We'll absolutely be giving you an update about that. And we'll take a closer look at where these Orioles and hummingbirds are. We'll pull up those maps and give you a more accurate visual of where they are. So you have that to look forward to on Saturday. So we'll be back Saturday at 10 a.m. with another broadcast. And until then, have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.